The alarm on the bridge of the Meridian Star had never sounded like that before, and I knew before anyone said a word that something in the sky above us had changed forever. I was standing near the observation deck of the orbital station when the alien ship folded into existence above Earth. One moment there was empty space. The next there was a shape so large it blotted out the morning light over half the Pacific. People screamed. Some ran. I did not move. I had learned a long time ago that running never changes what is coming. It only changes how tired you are when it arrives. My name is Elias Vance. I was a technician on the station that day, nothing more. A man who fixed communication arrays and kept quiet in the mess hall. Nobody looked at me twice. That was exactly how I wanted it. But that morning, everything about my quiet life began to unravel, thread by thread, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The alien vessel did not fire. It did not send drones or scouts. It simply opened a single channel, broadcasting on every frequency Earth used, military and civilian alike, so that no government could hide what was about to happen. A voice came through, calm and layered, like several tones speaking at once. People of Earth, we do not come to conquer. We come because we have no other choice left. Our enemy is close, and it will not stop with us. We ask for the one your world calls its greatest warrior. Send him, and we may all survive what comes next. For 3 days, the world argued about what that meant. I watched the news feeds from the station, listening to presidents and generals debate who Earth's greatest warrior even was. Names were thrown around, decorated officers, commanders who had led victorious campaigns, men and women whose faces were plastered across recruitment posters. I remember laughing quietly to myself at some of the names, not because they were bad soldiers, but because none of them understood what the aliens were really asking for. On the 4th day, a shuttle arrived at the station, and 2 armed escorts stepped out and asked for me by name. I remember the exact words the young officer used. Sergeant Elias Vance, you are ordered to report to Earth Defense Command immediately. I had not worn a uniform in years. I had not answered to that rank in years. I asked him if he was certain he had the right person, because surely there had been some mistake. He looked at a small tablet in his hand, then back at me, and said there was no mistake. My orders had come from the highest levels of command, and no one below that level was allowed to question them. I did not argue. Arguing has never solved anything in my experience. I packed a single bag, the same bag I had carried through every posting I had ever held, and I followed him onto the shuttle without another word. The descent to Earth Defense Command took less than an hour, but it felt far longer, because I already suspected what waited for me there. When the shuttle doors opened, I stepped into a hallway filled with officers who stopped talking the moment they saw my face. Some looked away entirely. Others studied me the way you study something you are afraid might notice you back. I had grown used to that look over the years, though I had hoped never to see it again. General Wallace met me personally, which told me everything I needed to know about how serious this had become. He was a tall man, gray at the temples, with the kind of tired eyes that come from making decisions no one should have to make. He shook my hand firmly and led me into a private briefing room without a single word of small talk. You know why you're here, he said once the door closed behind us. I have a guess, I answered. I'd rather you tell me I'm wrong. He shook his head slowly. The aliens sent very specific requirements. They didn't ask for our largest army or our most advanced weapons. They asked for the individual behind a particular set of sealed files. Files with your name on them, Elias. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. Those files were supposed to stay closed. They were, he agreed, until an alien intelligence system cracked encryption we didn't think anyone outside Earth could touch. They found what happened during the Kestrel incident. They know exactly what you did there, and exactly why nobody who served with you will speak of it. I said nothing. There was nothing comfortable to say. The Kestrel incident was a memory I kept locked away in the back of my mind, visited only in the quiet hours when sleep refused to come. It was not something I was proud of. It was something I had survived, and survival had cost more than anyone outside that operation could understand. General Wallace slid a folder across the table toward me. I did not open it. I already knew what it contained. The alien princess who sent this request is named Withera, he continued. She leads a coalition of allied species called the Kalinth Imperium. They are fighting something we don't fully understand yet. an enemy that has wiped out 3 of their outposts in the last month alone. She specifically requested you by the classification the aliens gave your file. Roughly translated, it means the one who ends conflicts permanently. I finally looked up at him. That's not a compliment where I come from. I know, he said quietly. That's exactly why we're sending you, instead of someone who would wear it as one. There was a long silence between us, filled only by the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. I thought about all the soldiers I had known over the years, men and women who spoke of their service with pride, who told stories at reunions about the battles they had survived. I had never been able to join those conversations. Whenever someone asked me what happened at Kestrel, I changed the subject, or simply left the room. Not because I was ashamed of my orders, but because some things cannot be turned into stories without losing the weight of what they truly cost. They still want me to go, I said. It was not a question. They want you to go tomorrow, Wallace answered. The ship that carried their request is already waiting in high orbit. Princess Euthera herself will meet you when you arrive. I asked him the only question that mattered to me at that moment. Do you believe sending me is the right decision? He looked at me for a long time before answering. I believe you are the only person on this planet capable of doing what needs to be done. Whether that makes it right is not something I can answer with any certainty. That night, I did not sleep. I sat alone in the small quarters they gave me at Defense Command, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of vehicles moving supplies toward the launch site. I thought about the quiet life I had built for myself after Kestrel, the years spent fixing communication systems on a station far from any conflict, the deliberate anonymity I had wrapped around myself like armor. All of it was gone now, stripped away by a single request from a princess on the other side of the galaxy who somehow understood exactly what I was, even though I had spent years trying to forget it myself. In the morning, they brought me to the launch facility. A small crowd of officers and scientists had gathered to watch the departure. Though none of them approached me directly, I recognized a few faces from years earlier, men who had served near me during other operations, men who now nodded from a distance instead of shaking my hand. I understood their hesitation. I would have done the same in their position. The shuttle that carried me toward orbit was unlike anything Earth had built before, a joint project between human engineers and technology, shared by the Kalinth delegation as a gesture of good faith. As we broke through the atmosphere, I watched the curve of the planet fall away beneath me, the blue and green surface shrinking into something small and fragile against the darkness surrounding it. I had seen this view before, during earlier deployments, but this time it felt different. This time, I was leaving not just a planet, but the quiet life I had built to protect myself from ever becoming who I used to be again. The alien flagship waited for us, just beyond the edge of Earth's defensive perimeter, a vessel so vast it seemed to swallow the light around it. As our shuttle approached, an escort of smaller alien craft moved into formation around us, their metallic hulls catching the sunlight in patterns unlike anything human engineering had ever produced. I studied them carefully through the shuttle's viewport, cataloging weapon placements and defensive systems out of pure habit, even though no one had asked me to. When we docked, a small welcoming party waited at the airlock. Among them stood a figure unlike any I had encountered before, tall and elegant, with skin that shimmered faintly like polished stone under changing light. Her eyes were a deep violet, sharp and intelligent, studying me with the same intensity I imagine I had studied their ships only minutes earlier. I understood immediately that this was Princess Euthera. She stepped forward and spoke in a voice carried through a small translation device attached near her collar. "You are the one called Elias Vance." "I am," I answered simply. She studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable to me at first. I imagined she expected someone different, someone who carried himself the way soldiers in her own culture likely carried themselves, proud and imposing, eager to speak of past victories. Instead, she found a quiet man in simple traveling clothes, carrying a single bag, offering no salute, no declaration of purpose, nothing but calm attention. "You do not look like what our records described," she said finally. "People rarely do," I answered. "Records only capture what happened, not who someone actually is." Something shifted in her expression then, something I could not quite identify, curiosity perhaps, or the beginning of doubt about whether Earth had sent her what she truly needed. She gestured for me to follow her deeper into the ship, and as I walked beside her through corridors filled with alien crew members who stopped their work to watch me pass, I felt the weight of expectation pressing down on me from every direction. "Our enemy grows closer with each passing day," Euthera said as we walked. "They have already destroyed 3 outposts along our border. My advisors believe your presence alone may change the course of what is coming." "I don't fight because of what people believe about me," I said. "I fight because someone has to, and because I understand the cost better than most." She glanced sideways at me, studying my face as though searching for something hidden beneath the surface. "Your file mentioned an operation called Kestrel. My advisors could not determine exactly what happened there, only that it ended an entire engagement without further resistance from your enemy at the time." I felt the familiar tightness return to my chest, the same feeling that came whenever anyone mentioned that name. "Some things are better left in the files," I said quietly. "I'm here to help you now. That's what matters." She did not press further, though I could tell the question remained in her mind, waiting for another moment to resurface. We continued walking in silence until we reached a large chamber overlooking a massive viewport, stars stretching endlessly beyond the reinforced glass. Euthera stopped there and turned to face me fully. "I asked Earth for a war hero," she said. "Instead, they sent me a man who refuses to speak of war at all. I do not yet understand why, but something tells me I will learn soon enough." I met her gaze without flinching. "You will learn exactly as much as you need to know, exactly when you need to know it. Until then, I suggest we focus on the threat in front of us, rather than the past behind me." She held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded slowly, as though accepting an unspoken agreement between us. Behind her, through the viewport, the stars continued their silent watch, indifferent to the quiet tension building between 2 people who had just begun to understand how much they still did not know about each other. Somewhere far beyond that viewport, in the darkness between distant systems, something was already moving toward us, patient and unseen, waiting for the moment it would finally reveal itself. I could not see it yet, but I could feel it, the same way I had once felt an approaching storm, long before the first drop of rain touched the ground. Whatever waited out there in the dark, it was going to test every part of who I used to be, and I was not entirely certain the man standing quietly in this alien chamber was ready to become that person again. But readiness has never been something life waits for. It arrives when it arrives, whether you are prepared or not, and all a person can do is meet it standing. The chamber Princess Euthera led me to next was quieter than the corridors we had passed through, a private room lined with soft light that pulsed gently along the walls like a slow heartbeat. She gestured for me to sit across from her at a low table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I could tell she was choosing her next words carefully, the way someone does when they are about to ask a question they are not certain they want answered. "Before you arrived," she said finally, "my advisors spent many days studying the records your world provided. They expected to find declarations of victory, honors, perhaps recordings of your voice, describing great battles. Instead, they found silence. Files marked complete, with no further explanation. Reports that simply stated an engagement had ended, and that the enemy at the time chose not to continue hostilities in that region ever again." I kept my hands folded in my lap and said nothing. "This confused them," she continued. "In our culture, warriors who accomplish great things are celebrated openly. Songs are written, statues are built. Yet when my advisors attempted to speak with soldiers who served alongside you, they found only silence there as well. No stories, no celebration. Only careful avoidance, as though speaking your name might summon something none of them wished to face again." "Silence isn't always confusion," I said quietly. "Sometimes it's simply respect for something too heavy to carry into conversation." She studied me for a long moment. "Is that why you refuse to speak of it as well?" I considered my answer carefully before giving it. "I don't speak of it because there's nothing useful in the telling. Stories are meant to teach people something, or to honor something worth remembering. What happened during that operation doesn't fit either purpose. It simply happened, and I was the one who had to carry it afterward." Euthera leaned back slightly, her violet eyes studying me with an intensity that reminded me of interrogation rooms I had sat in many years earlier, though her posture held none of the hostility those rooms usually carried. My people are facing an enemy capable of erasing entire outposts within hours. I did not request you because I wanted a hero to inspire songs. I requested you because something in your history suggested you understood how to end a conflict permanently, rather than simply survive it. That's a dangerous thing to want, I answered. Ending something permanently rarely comes without cost. I am prepared to accept whatever cost is necessary to protect what remains of my people, she said, her voice hardening slightly. Are you prepared to help me carry that cost? Or will you continue hiding behind silence until the moment arrives when hiding is no longer an option? Her question landed harder than she likely intended, though I did not let my expression show it. I thought of the years I had spent building a quiet, anonymous life after Kestrel, repairing communication arrays, avoiding conversations that touched on my past, choosing solitude over the kind of camaraderie that inevitably led to questions I refused to answer. I had believed, foolishly perhaps, that distance and time would eventually smooth away whatever remained sharp inside me. Sitting across from a princess whose entire civilization now depended on whatever remained of that sharpness, I understood how wrong that belief had been. I'm here, I said simply. That should tell you everything you need to know about my willingness to help. She nodded slowly, though I sensed she remained unsatisfied, still searching for something more concrete than my quiet presence. Before either of us could continue, a soft chime echoed through the chamber, followed by a voice speaking rapidly in a language I did not understand. Euthera's expression shifted immediately, her posture straightening as she rose from her seat. We are needed on the command deck, she said. A scouting vessel has returned with information about enemy movement near our border. I followed her through another set of corridors, these ones filled with a tension that had not existed during our earlier walk. Crew members moved with quicker steps now, their voices low and urgent as they passed data between stations. We arrived at a wide circular chamber, dominated by a massive holographic display, showing a sprawling star map, dotted with markers I assumed represented settlements, outposts, and defensive positions scattered across the region. An alien officer, taller than most of the crew I had seen so far, stepped forward and addressed Euthera directly. I could not understand his words, but the translation device attached to my collar, given to me shortly after boarding, began rendering his speech into something I could follow. Princess, the scouting vessel confirms movement along the outer settlements. 3 more outposts have gone silent within the last hour. We believe the enemy is advancing faster than our previous estimates suggested. Euthera's jaw tightened as she studied the star map before her. Show me the projected path. The hologram shifted, highlighting a route stretching from the outer settlements toward the very fleet we currently occupied. My eyes moved instinctively across the display, calculating distances and timeframes out of old habit, the same instinct that had never fully left me no matter how many years had passed since I last used it professionally. At their current pace, I said, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber, they'll reach this fleet's position within roughly 2 days, assuming no additional delays along the route. Several officers turned to look at me, surprise evident on their alien features. Euthera studied the map again, then glanced toward me with an expression that suggested she had not expected me to speak so directly, or so quickly. You've studied our star charts for less than a minute, she said. Numbers don't change depending on who's reading them, I answered. Distance, speed, and time work the same way no matter which side of the galaxy you're standing on. One of the officers, a broad-shouldered figure with deep blue markings across his face, stepped forward, with obvious skepticism in his posture. This human has been aboard for less than an hour, and already he speaks as though he understands our tactical situation better than officers who have studied this enemy for months. I met his gaze evenly. I'm not claiming to understand your enemy. I'm simply reading the numbers in front of me. If I'm wrong, tell me where my calculation fails, and I'll gladly correct it. The officer opened his mouth to respond, but Euthera raised a hand, silencing him before he could continue. Commander Draven, our new ally was requested specifically because of his understanding of conflict. Allow him the opportunity to demonstrate whether that understanding holds value before dismissing it. Draven's expression tightened, though he said nothing further, stepping back into his previous position with visible reluctance. I felt the weight of his suspicions settle over me, understanding immediately that not everyone aboard this vessel would welcome my presence as readily as their princess had chosen to. What do you know about this enemy? I asked, turning my attention back to the star map. Not assumptions. Confirmed information only. Ethera exchanged a glance with her officers before answering. They call themselves nothing we have been able to translate meaningfully. We refer to them as the devouring silence, based on how they operate. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. Every outpost they've attacked has gone completely silent within hours, all life signs vanishing without explanation. We've recovered no survivors, no wreckage suggesting conventional weapons, and no communication intercepts revealing their intentions. No survivors at all, I repeated slowly. None, she confirmed. Whatever method they use to eliminate a settlement leaves nothing behind capable of testifying to what happened. I felt a familiar cold settle into my chest. The same sensation that had once warned me, long before Kestrel, that I was facing something far larger than the mission briefing had prepared me for. I studied the star map again, tracing the pattern of destroyed outposts, searching for any detail that might explain how an enemy could erase an entire population without leaving evidence behind. These outposts, I said, were they defended? Each one maintains standard defensive systems, Draven answered, his tone still carrying suspicion, though slightly less hostile than before. Shields, weapon platforms, trained personnel, none of it made any measurable difference. That suggests they're not simply overwhelming defenses through brute force, I said. If shields and weapons made no difference at all, whatever method they use bypasses conventional defense entirely. Ethera studied me carefully. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting your enemy isn't fighting a war the way your people understand fighting, I answered. They're removing obstacles, not defeating them. There's a difference, and understanding that difference might be the only advantage we have before they arrive. The chamber fell silent for a long moment, officers exchanging uncertain glances, clearly unsettled by the implication behind my words. Ethera finally broke the silence, her voice steady despite the tension visible in her posture. If what you're suggesting is true, then conventional defense will not save this fleet. No, I agreed quietly. It won't. Then what will? I looked at the star map once more, at the slow advance marked across it, calculating silently in my mind, the way I had once calculated survival during Kestrel, weighing options that had no comfortable answers, understanding what they actually are before they arrive, I said finally, and being willing to do whatever is necessary once we do. Draven's expression hardened further, though he said nothing this time, perhaps beginning to understand, however reluctantly, why Earth had chosen to send someone who refused to speak of war, rather than someone eager to boast of victories. Ethera held my gaze for a long moment, something unreadable shifting behind her violet eyes. Then we begin immediately, she said. Gather every fragment of data we have on previous encounters, however small. If understanding this enemy is our only path forward, we cannot afford to waste another hour. As the officers moved to comply, I remained near the star map, studying the pattern of destroyed outposts once more, feeling the same cold certainty settle deeper into my chest. Whatever waited for us along that advancing path, it was going to demand more from me than simple tactical knowledge. It was going to demand the part of myself I had spent years trying to keep buried, the part that had allowed me to survive Kestrel in the first place, and I was not entirely certain how much of that part remained inside me anymore, or whether calling it forward again would leave anything recognizable behind once this was finally over. Ethera's voice pulled me from my thoughts. Elias. I turned to face her. Whatever you were during that operation your people refused to discuss, she said quietly. I hope it remains enough to protect what's left of my people, because if the reports about this enemy are accurate, we will need every part of it before this is finished. I held her gaze steadily. So do I. Neither of us spoke further, though the unspoken understanding between us had shifted, deepened by the weight of what we both now suspected waited beyond the edge of that star map, patient and silent, moving closer with every passing hour. The next day passed in a blur of preparation, briefings, and quiet observation. I spent most of it walking the length of the flagship, studying its defensive systems, its crew formations, the way officers moved between stations during simulated alerts. Nobody stopped me, though I noticed several crew members watching from a distance, whispering among themselves whenever they thought I was out of earshot. I had grown accustomed to that kind of attention over the years, though it never grew comfortable, only familiar. It was during one of these walks that I first met Lieutenant Nora Ellison, one of only a handful of other humans stationed aboard the vessel, as part of a small liaison team assigned to assist the Alliance. She was younger than me by at least a decade, sharp-eyed, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from actual field experience rather than borrowed bravado. She approached me near one of the observation decks, studying me with open curiosity, rather than the guarded suspicion I had grown used to from the alien crew. "You're the one they pulled off the station," she said, falling into step beside me as I continued walking. "That's me," I answered simply. "I read part of your transfer file before it got sealed again," she continued. "Not much in it, but enough to know Command wanted you here badly enough to override half a dozen procedural objections. People tend to overreact when they don't understand what they're looking at," I said. She studied me for a long moment, clearly unconvinced by my dismissive tone. "For what it's worth, I don't care what happened at Kestrel. I care whether you can help us survive whatever's heading toward this fleet." Her directness caught me slightly off guard, though I appreciated it more than I expected to. Most people either avoided the subject entirely, or approached it with careful, probing curiosity, designed to draw out details I had no intention of sharing. Ellison simply set the matter aside, focusing instead on what mattered in front of us. "I can help," I said. "Whether that help looks the way anyone expects remains to be seen." She nodded, accepting the answer without pressing further, and for the first time since arriving aboard the flagship, I felt something close to genuine companionship settle between myself and another human being. We continued walking together, discussing the defensive layout of the fleet, the strengths and weaknesses of the Alliance's current strategy, and the growing unease among the crew regarding the enemy's advance. Later that evening, Yathera summoned both of us to a private briefing alongside Commander Draven and several senior officers. The chamber held a heavier atmosphere than before, the earlier tension now sharpened into something closer to genuine fear. A large display dominated the center of the room, showing recovered footage from a scouting drone that had barely escaped one of the destroyed outposts before losing contact. "We've recovered partial data from the drone's final transmission," Yathera said, gesturing toward the display. "It isn't much, but it's the closest look we've had at the enemy's method." The footage played silently, grainy and distorted, showing the outer perimeter of a settlement moments before its destruction. I watched carefully, studying every detail the drone's camera managed to capture. A strange distortion moved across the settlement's outer shields. Not an explosion, not a visible weapon, simply a slow disruption spreading outward from a single point, causing structures and shield generators alike to simply fail, as though the very energy holding them together had been unraveled from within. "There," I said, pointing toward the display. "Pause it there." An officer complied, freezing the footage at the exact moment the distortion reached its peak. I studied the image closely, noting the way the disruption spread in careful, deliberate patterns, rather than the chaotic spread of conventional weapon fire. "This isn't destruction," I said slowly. "This is disassembly." Draven frowned deeply. "Explain." "Conventional weapons destroy through force," I continued. "Explosions, kinetic impact, energy discharge. This is different. Look at how evenly the disruption spreads, how methodically it moves from point to point. Whatever technology they're using isn't destroying the settlement through force. It's unraveling it, piece by piece, at a fundamental level." Ellison studied the footage carefully, her expression darkening as she reached the same conclusion I had. "If that's accurate, conventional shields wouldn't just fail to stop it. They'd actively contribute to the process, since shields depend on maintaining stable energy fields, which is exactly what this disruption appears to target." "That would explain why no defensive system has made any difference," Yathera said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of dawning realization. "We've been reinforcing exactly the kind of systems this enemy is designed to unravel." The chamber fell into uneasy silence as the implications settled over everyone present. If Ellison and I were correct, the Alliance's entire defensive strategy was not simply ineffective against this enemy, it was actively counterproductive, reinforcing vulnerabilities rather than protecting against them. "Then what do you propose?" Draven asked, his earlier hostility giving way to something closer to genuine desperation. "If our defenses only worsen the outcome, what alternative remains?" I studied the frozen image on the display for a long moment before answering. Disruption technology like this requires a source, something generating and directing that unraveling effect. If we can identify where that source originates, whether it's centralized within their vessels or distributed somehow, we might find a way to interrupt it before it reaches full effect. You're suggesting we attack the source directly, Ithera said. I'm suggesting we stop trying to defend against something designed to exploit defense itself, I answered. If this enemy dismantles anything built to resist it, then resistance in the traditional sense won't save this fleet. We need a different approach entirely. Draven studied me with an expression that had shifted from hostility toward something closer to reluctant respect. And what approach would that be? Exactly. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the familiar weight settle over me, the same weight that had once accompanied every difficult decision made during Kestrel. The kind of approach that doesn't leave room for half measures, I said quietly. If they dismantle everything built to withstand them, we don't withstand. We remove the source before it ever reaches us. Ithera held my gaze steadily, understanding passing silently between us. You're describing exactly the kind of decision your own people refuse to discuss. I am, I admitted. The chamber remained silent for a long moment, every officer present, understanding the weight of what had just been proposed, understanding that whatever path forward existed would demand sacrifices none of them had fully prepared themselves to make. Ellison studied me carefully, her earlier easy confidence now tempered by the gravity of the conversation. If we're going to attempt something like this, she said finally, we'll need far more information than a single grainy transmission can provide.
Agreed, Ithera said.
Which means we need to send another scouting vessel, closer this time, close enough to gather detailed data on their fleet formation and technology before they reach our position. That's a significant risk, Draven said. The last scout barely escaped with what little data we have. It's a risk we no longer have the luxury of avoiding, Ithera answered firmly. Elias, would you be willing to accompany the scouting mission personally? I considered the question carefully, weighing the risk against the necessity of understanding exactly what we were facing, before committing the fleet to an irreversible course of action. Yes, I said finally. If we're going to make a decision this significant, I want to see exactly what we're deciding against with my own eyes, rather than relying entirely on second-hand data. Ellison stepped forward before I could continue. I'm coming as well. If this mission requires the kind of judgment call you're describing, I'd rather have another set of human eyes confirming what we find. Ithera nodded slowly, though I could see genuine concern behind her composed expression. Very well. The scouting vessel will depart within the hour. I trust both of you understand the danger involved. We do, I answered simply. As the briefing concluded, and officers began dispersing to prepare for the mission ahead, Ithera approached me quietly, her voice lowered enough that only I could hear her words clearly. I chose to request Earth's greatest warrior because I believed strength alone might be enough to save my people, she said. I am beginning to understand that what I actually need is someone capable of seeing clearly, even when clarity demands choices no one wishes to make. Clarity has a cost, I answered quietly. I hope your people are prepared to accept whatever that cost turns out to be. I hope so as well, she said, her violet eyes carrying a weight I recognized immediately, the same weight I had once carried myself, before Kestrel forced me to understand exactly how heavy that cost could truly become. As I turned to prepare for the mission ahead, I felt the familiar cold settle deeper into my chest, the same certainty that had once warned me long before an enemy's true nature revealed itself completely. Whatever waited for us out there in the advancing darkness, I understood now that understanding it would require confronting parts of myself I had spent years trying desperately to forget, parts that Kestrel had once demanded from me completely, and parts I was no longer entirely certain I could summon again, without losing something essential in the process. But there was no room left for hesitation now. The scouting vessel waited. The enemy continued its silent advance, and somewhere beyond the edge of the star map, the answer to every question keeping this fleet from finding a path forward remained hidden, waiting to be uncovered before it was too late for any of us to matter. The scouting vessel was smaller than anything I had traveled in since arriving aboard the flagship, sleek and quiet, built for stealth rather than confrontation. Ellison sat beside me in the narrow cabin, while 2 alien crew members handled navigation and sensor arrays near the front of the craft. Nobody spoke much during the initial hours of travel, the weight of our mission settling over all of us as the flagship shrank behind us into the darkness. "You've been quiet," Ellison said eventually, breaking the long silence between us. "I'm always quiet," I answered. "Not like this," she said. "There's a difference between someone who doesn't talk much and someone who's trying not to remember something. I've seen both. This is the second one." I glanced at her, surprised by how easily she had read through my composed exterior. "You're observant. I served under someone like you once," she said. "Different circumstances, different mission, but the same silence. He never talked about what happened before I met him either. Took me years to understand it wasn't secrecy, it was survival." I said nothing for a long moment, watching the stars stretch past the viewport in slow, steady lines. "What happened to him?" I asked finally. "The officer you mentioned." "He didn't make it home from his next deployment," she said quietly. "Some people carry too much weight for too long before something finally breaks." Her words settled uncomfortably close to thoughts I had spent years avoiding. I turned my attention back toward the viewport, watching the distant glow of an approaching system grow slightly larger with each passing hour. "I don't intend to break," I said finally. "Neither did he," she answered, "until he did." Neither of us spoke further after that, though the weight of her words remained with me throughout the remainder of the journey. Hours passed slowly, each one bringing us closer to the outer edge of enemy territory, where the destroyed outposts marked on Yathera's star map waited in silent testimony to whatever force we were about to encounter directly. The alien navigator finally spoke, his voice carrying tension through the cabin's translation system. "We are approaching sensor range of the nearest destroyed outpost. Recommend reducing speed and engaging stealth systems immediately." The vessel slowed, its systems shifting into a quieter mode, designed to minimize any signature that might alert nearby enemy forces to our presence. Through the viewport, the shattered remains of the outpost slowly came into view, and I felt a cold weight settle into my chest at the sight of it. The outpost had once been a substantial settlement, judging by the scattered remains of structures still visible against the darkness of space. Now it drifted in silent ruin. Buildings collapsed inward as though something had methodically dismantled every support structure at once. There were no visible explosions, no scorching from weapon fire, only the eerie stillness of a place unraveled from within. "No debris field," Ellison said quietly, studying the scene through the viewport. "Usually destruction like this scatters wreckage across a significant distance. This looks almost surgical." "Because it was," I said, studying the pattern of collapse carefully. "Whatever caused this didn't explode the structures outward. It removed whatever was holding them together, and gravity did the rest." The navigator adjusted the ship's sensors, gathering detailed scans of the wreckage as we passed cautiously along its perimeter. I watched the data scroll across a nearby display, studying energy signatures, material composition, anything that might reveal a pattern behind the enemy's method of destruction. "There," Ellison said suddenly, pointing toward a faint signature barely visible within the sensor readout. "That energy trace. It's still active." I studied the reading carefully, recognizing immediately what she had identified. A faint, lingering signature remained embedded within the wreckage, pulsing at slow, irregular intervals, unlike anything conventional weapon technology would leave behind. "That's not residual energy from an attack," I said slowly. "That's something still functioning." The navigator's posture stiffened immediately. "Are you suggesting the enemy left something behind deliberately?" "I'm suggesting we need a closer look," I answered, already rising from my seat. "If that signature is still active, it might be the closest thing to direct data on their technology we're likely to find, without confronting their fleet directly." Ellison exchanged a glance with the alien crew before nodding firmly. "I'll suit up. If we're doing this, someone needs eyes directly on that signature." Within minutes, both of us were sealed into compact environmental suits, moving carefully through a small airlock toward the drifting wreckage beyond. The silence of open space pressed heavily around us as we approached the ruined outpost, the only sound the steady rhythm of our own breathing inside the suits. The lingering signature grew stronger as we approached, guiding us toward a partially collapsed structure near the center of the settlement's remains. Ellison moved cautiously beside me, her posture tense despite years of obvious field experience. "There," she said, pointing toward a small device embedded within the wreckage. pulsing faintly with the same irregular rhythm we had detected from the ship. I approached carefully, studying the device without touching it directly. It was unlike anything I had encountered before, a small, intricate structure composed of materials that seemed to shift subtly under the light of my suit's illumination, as though the object itself resisted remaining a single fixed shape. "This is what caused the disruption," I said quietly, studying the device's slow pulse. "A localized generator, designed to unravel the surrounding structure's integrity at a fundamental level." Ellison studied it carefully alongside me. "If this is what caused the entire settlement to collapse, it's remarkably small for something with that much destructive capability." "That's what worries me," I said. "If a device this size caused this much damage, their full fleet likely carries something significantly more powerful." Before either of us could continue examining the device further, a sudden alert sounded through our suit communications, the alien navigator's voice, carrying sharp urgency through the channel.
"Multiple enemy signatures detected. Approaching rapidly from the far side of the debris field."
"Return to the vessel immediately." Ellison and I exchanged a brief glance before moving quickly back toward the airlock, the weight of the discovery we had just made settling heavily over both of us as we retreated. By the time we reached the ship and sealed ourselves back inside, the navigator had already begun preparing for immediate departure, the enemy signatures growing steadily closer on the sensor display. "How many?" I asked, stripping off my suit's helmet as quickly as possible. "3 vessels, approaching at significant speed," the navigator answered. "We do not have time to gather further data. We must leave immediately." The ship surged forward, engines straining as we pulled away from the ruined outpost, the 3 enemy signatures growing larger on the display behind us, despite our best efforts at evasion. I studied the approaching vessels carefully through the ship's sensors, noting their unusual configuration, sleek and asymmetrical, unlike any conventional warship design I had encountered before. "They're gaining on us," Ellison said, tension evident in her voice. "Increase speed," I said to the navigator. "Whatever margin we have left, use it now." The ship lurched forward, engines pushed to their absolute limit as the enemy vessels continued closing the distance behind us. I watched the sensor display intently, calculating the rate of closure, searching for any advantage that might buy us the time needed to escape completely. "They're not firing," Ellison said suddenly, studying the display with obvious confusion. "If they wanted to destroy us, why haven't they engaged yet?" I studied the pattern of their approach carefully, a cold realization settling over me as understanding finally clicked into place. "They're not trying to destroy us," I said slowly. "They're trying to disable us, just like the outpost." The ship shuddered suddenly, alarms blaring throughout the cabin as the navigator's console lit up with cascading system failures. "Shields are failing," he announced, panic edging into his voice. "Something is interfering with our core systems directly. The same disruption technology," I said, understanding fully now what we were facing. "They're using the same method against our ship that they used against the outpost." Ellison's expression hardened with grim determination. "Then we don't have much time before this vessel becomes exactly like that wreckage we just left behind." I turned toward the navigator immediately. "Divert all remaining power to propulsion. Forget the shields entirely. They're only accelerating whatever this disruption is targeting." The navigator complied instantly, redirecting power away from failing defensive systems and into the ship's engines. The vessel surged forward with renewed speed, pulling gradually away from the pursuing enemy signatures as their disruptive effect lost its grip on our systems. Minutes passed in tense silence as we continued our desperate retreat, the enemy vessels slowly falling behind as distance widened between us. By the time we finally reached the safety of the flagship's defensive perimeter, every system aboard our small vessel had been pushed to the absolute edge of failure, but we had survived. As the ship docked safely within the flagship's hangar, Ellison turned to me, her expression carrying the weight of everything we had just witnessed. "We were right," she said quietly, "about the disruption, about all of it." "Yes," I answered, feeling the familiar cold settle deeper into my chest. "And now we understand exactly what we're facing. The only question remaining is whether understanding it will be enough to stop it before it reaches everyone aboard this fleet." Neither of us had an answer to that question yet, though I already suspected, deep within the parts of myself I had spent years trying to bury, that finding an answer would require far more from me than simple understanding alone. Word of what Ellison and I had discovered spread through the flagship within hours, carried between crew stations in hushed, urgent tones. By the time we reached the command deck to deliver our full report, Yathera and her senior officers had already gathered, along with representatives from several Allied vessels connected through a live communication relay. "You confirmed the enemy's method directly," Yathera said once we finished recounting the mission. "A localized disruption technology capable of unraveling structural and energy systems from within, rather than destroying them through conventional force." "That's correct," I said. "And based on what we witnessed during our retreat, their warships likely carry a significantly more powerful version of the same technology." Draven studied the recovered data carefully, his earlier hostility toward me now replaced by grim focus on the problem in front of him. "If conventional shields only worsen the effect, then every vessel in this fleet remains critically vulnerable."
Then we adjust our approach.
Yathera said firmly.
Elias, you mentioned identifying the source of this disruption as a potential path forward.
"Have you developed any further insight into how we might accomplish that?" I considered the question carefully before answering. The device we found at the outpost was compact, but it required time to fully unravel the settlement's structures. That suggests the effect isn't instantaneous. It builds gradually, which means there's a window of opportunity before it reaches full effect. "A window to do what, exactly?" Draven asked. "To interrupt the source directly, before the disruption spreads far enough to cause irreversible damage," I answered. "If we can identify precisely where aboard their vessels this technology originates, a targeted strike during that window might neutralize it before it can unravel our own systems." Ellison stepped forward, correcting the confidence in my proposal slightly. "That assumes we can get close enough to identify the source without triggering the very disruption we're trying to avoid." "It does," I admitted, "which means we'll need a plan that accounts for that risk directly, rather than assuming it away." The chamber fell into a tense silence as officers considered the implications of what I had proposed. Word soon began to spread beyond the command deck, carried through the fleet's internal communication channels, reaching crews aboard Allied vessels who had grown steadily more anxious with each passing hour as the enemy's advance continued. It was during this period that I first became aware of how quickly my presence had begun shaping the fears and hopes of an entire fleet, in ways I had never anticipated nor particularly wanted. Crew members who passed me in the corridors began speaking in hushed, reverent tones, some referring to me using a translated phrase that roughly meant, "the quiet ending," a title I had not requested and did not welcome. Ellison noticed it as well, walking beside me one evening as we moved between briefings. "They're talking about you like you're some kind of legend already," she said. "Word about what happened during the scouting mission has spread through half the fleet." "I didn't do anything legendary," I said. "I identified a threat and survived retreating from it." "That's not the same as heroism. Try telling that to a fleet desperate for something to believe in," she answered. "Fear makes people search for certainty wherever they can find it, even if that certainty is built on more hope than fact." Her words unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. I had spent years deliberately avoiding exactly this kind of attention, understanding from painful experience how dangerous it became when people began placing more faith in a person than the situation actually warranted. Whatever remained of my reputation from Kestrel had already followed me across the galaxy, and now it seemed to be growing into something even larger, fed by fear and uncertainty, rather than any actual understanding of what I was truly capable of. That fear reached a critical point 3 days later, when a captured transmission intercepted from an enemy scouting vessel revealed something none of us had anticipated. Yathera summoned me directly to a private viewing chamber, where a small team of intelligence officers had gathered around a recovered data fragment. "We managed to decode a partial transmission between enemy vessels," Yathera said as I entered. "Most of it remains untranslatable, but one section was clear enough to understand completely." She gestured toward a display showing the translated fragment. My eyes moved across the words carefully, absorbing their meaning as a cold, familiar weight settled into my chest. The fragment referenced a name that should never have crossed paths with this enemy, my name, followed by a designation drawn directly from Earth's own classified records regarding the Kestrel incident. Somehow, impossibly, information about my past had reached an enemy that had never previously engaged with Earth at all. "How is this possible?" I said quietly, studying the translated words carefully. "We don't know," Yathira admitted. "Our working theory is that this enemy possesses intelligence-gathering capabilities far beyond what we previously understood, capable of accessing data networks we believed were completely secure." I felt the ground shift beneath my careful composure, understanding immediately the implication behind what she had just revealed. If this enemy already knew about Kestrel, they understood exactly what I represented, not as an unknown variable, but as a known and specifically targeted threat. "They're not just advancing toward this fleet by chance," I said slowly. "They know I'm here, and they know exactly why my presence should concern them." Yathira studied me carefully, her violet eyes searching my expression for any hint of what that realization truly meant. "What did happen at Kestrel, Elias? I no longer believe I can lead this alliance effectively without understanding exactly what my enemy already knows about the man standing beside me." I remained silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of years spent carefully avoiding this exact conversation, pressing down upon me now with undeniable finality. Whatever remained of my ability to keep that memory buried had finally reached its limit, forced open by an enemy who somehow understood its significance better than the very people who had witnessed it alongside me. "Kestrel wasn't a battle in the way most people understand battles," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. "It was a situation where every conventional option had already failed, where the enemy at the time had already demonstrated they would not stop advancing, regardless of losses, regardless of negotiation, regardless of anything short of complete, permanent cessation of their capability to continue." Yathira remained silent, allowing me to continue without interruption. "I was given an impossible choice," I continued. "Continue attempting conventional resistance, knowing it would eventually fail and cost countless additional lives in the process, or take an action that would end their capability to continue entirely, at a cost I have never been able to fully discuss with anyone since." "What was that cost?" Yathira asked quietly. I met her gaze steadily, feeling the familiar weight of memory pressing against the careful walls I had built around it for years. "It cost me the ability to ever again believe that ending a conflict and surviving it undamaged were the same thing. I ended that engagement permanently. I have never once believed that ending it was the same as winning it." The chamber remained silent for a long moment, the weight of my words settling over everyone present. Yathira finally spoke, her voice carrying a mixture of understanding and renewed concern. "And now this enemy understands exactly what you're capable of becoming, should circumstances demand it once more." "Yes," I said quietly, "which means they're not simply advancing toward this fleet blindly. They're advancing knowing exactly what waits for them if I'm forced to become that person again." "Does that concern you?" she asked. I considered her question carefully, before answering with complete honesty. "It concerns me more than anything else, currently facing this fleet, because the last time I became that person, I nearly lost every part of myself that made surviving afterward worth the cost. I do not know if there's enough of me left to survive becoming that person a second time." Yathira studied me for a long, quiet moment, understanding settling visibly behind her expression. "Then I hope, for both our sakes, that we find another path forward, before that choice becomes unavoidable." "So do I answered quietly. "But given what we've already learned about this enemy's advance, and given that they now know exactly why my presence here should concern them, I suspect we may not have the luxury of finding that other path in time." Neither of us spoke further, the weight of that unspoken certainty settling heavily between us as the fleet continued its tense preparations, the enemy's advance growing steadily closer with each passing hour, carrying with it the growing certainty that whatever remained hidden within me would soon be tested far beyond anything I had prepared myself to face again. The final approach came faster than anyone aboard the fleet had prepared for. Less than 2 days after my conversation with Yathira, sensor arrays across every Allied vessel detected the enemy's main force emerging from the outer darkness, far larger than any previous engagement had suggested. Dozens of vessels moved in tight, coordinated formation, their strange asymmetrical hulls catching distant starlight in patterns that seemed almost deliberately unsettling. I stood on the command deck alongside Yathira, Draven, and Ellison, watching the growing formation appear across the holographic display. The chamber around us had fallen into a tense, focused silence, every officer present understanding that whatever decisions were made in the coming hours would determine whether this fleet, and everyone aboard it, survived the day.
Their numbers exceed our previous estimates significantly,
Draven said, studying the display with a grim expression. If they intend a direct assault, our current defensive posture will not hold long enough to matter. Then we don't rely on our current defensive posture, I said, stepping closer to the display. We use exactly the plan we discussed. Identify the source of their disruption technology, and target it directly before it reaches full effect. Euthera turned to face me fully. Are you prepared to lead that effort personally? I felt the familiar cold settle deeper into my chest, understanding fully now that the moment I had quietly dreaded since first learning of this enemy had finally arrived. Yes, I answered simply. Ellison stepped forward immediately. Then I'm coming with you. So am I, Draven said, his earlier hostility completely replaced now by grim determination. Whatever doubts I held about your presence aboard this fleet, I no longer have the luxury of maintaining them. Euthera studied each of us carefully, before nodding once, firmly. Then we begin immediately. Draven, coordinate the fleet's remaining vessels into a defensive formation, designed to draw their forces away from the strike team's approach. Elias, Ellison, prepare for immediate departure. Within the hour, our small strike vessel launched from the flagship's hangar, moving quietly along the fleet's flank as the remaining Allied ships shifted into a defensive formation, designed to hold the enemy's attention long enough for our approach to remain undetected. I sat quietly in the vessel's cramped cabin, studying tactical displays alongside Ellison and Draven, feeling the familiar weight of old instincts settling over me once more, instincts I had spent years trying desperately to leave behind. Once we identify the source vessel, Draven said, studying the enemy formation carefully, how do you propose we neutralize it without triggering the very disruption we're attempting to avoid? Speed and precision, I answered. If their technology requires time to build toward full effect, then a fast, direct strike against the source before it can react gives us the only realistic chance of success. And if we're wrong about the timing? Ellison asked quietly. I met her gaze steadily. Then we won't have the chance to be wrong about anything else afterward. The vessel continued its careful approach, weaving quietly along the outer edge of the battle now unfolding behind us, as Allied ships engaged the leading edge of the enemy formation. Explosions of light flickered silently in the distance through our rear viewport, a battle already costing lives on both sides as we pressed forward toward our true objective. Sensor readings finally identified a vessel near the center of the enemy formation, larger than the others, radiating the same distinct energy signature we had first detected at the ruined outpost, now amplified many times over. That's the source, I said, studying the reading carefully. Whatever disruption technology powers their entire assault likely originates from that vessel directly. Getting close enough to strike it directly will mean passing through the heart of their formation, Draven said, tension evident in his voice. Then we move quickly, and we don't hesitate once we're inside their perimeter, I answered. The vessel surged forward, weaving through gaps in the enemy formation, with careful, practiced precision, every maneuver calculated to minimize exposure while maximizing our remaining speed advantage. Enemy fire began targeting our vessel as we penetrated deeper into their formation, forcing evasive maneuvers that pushed our small ship's systems to their absolute limit. We're taking damage, Ellison reported, studying the ship's failing systems display with growing urgency. Shields are down to critical levels. Ignore the shields, I said immediately. Push everything remaining into propulsion and weapons. We're committed now. The vessel lurched forward through a final gap in the enemy formation, bringing the source vessel directly into view ahead of us, its hull pulsing with the same eerie, shifting energy we had first witnessed embedded within the small device at the ruined outpost, now scaled to something far larger and far more dangerous. Target their primary power conduit, I said, studying the vessel's structure carefully, as old instincts guided my analysis with practiced precision. There, along the dorsal ridge, that's where the disruption technology draws its power. Draven aimed the ship's remaining weapon systems carefully, waiting for my signal. I watched the enemy vessel's energy readings carefully, calculating the narrow window where a strike would land with maximum effect, before their systems could adjust defensively. "Now," I said firmly. Draven fired immediately, the vessel's weapons striking precisely along the dorsal ridge, exactly where I had indicated. The enemy vessel shuddered violently, its pulsing energy signature flickering erratically before beginning to destabilize entirely. Around the battlefield, the effects rippled outward immediately, enemy vessels that had been advancing steadily suddenly faltering, their coordinated formation collapsing into confusion as the source of their unified technology began failing catastrophically. "It's working," Ellison said, studying the rapidly shifting battle data with cautious relief. "Their formation is breaking apart." But the celebration proved premature. The source vessel, rather than simply failing, began radiating an intense surge of energy outward. The same disruption technology that had once methodically unraveled an entire outpost, now discharging violently and unpredictably in every direction at once. "It's overloading," I said, understanding immediately the danger unfolding before us. "We need to move, now." Draven attempted to pull our vessel away immediately, but the surge reached us before we could clear its expanding radius. Alarms blared through the cabin as our ship's systems began failing rapidly, the same slow unraveling effect we had witnessed at the outpost, now beginning to spread through our own vessel's structure. "We're caught in the discharge," Ellison said, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Systems failing across every deck." I felt the old, familiar calm settle over me then, the same steady focus that had once guided me through the impossible choices of Kestrel, a calm I had spent years hoping never to summon again. "Ellison, redirect every remaining scrap of power toward the hull integrity field surrounding the cabin. Draven, prepare for emergency evacuation the moment I give the signal." Both of them moved immediately, following instructions with a trust I had not expected to earn so completely, given how recently either of them had first met me. I studied the ship's failing systems carefully, understanding that only a narrow window remained before the disruption effect reached a point of complete structural failure. "The moment I say now," I said steadily, "eject the cabin section completely. It's the only part of this ship we can still save." "And you?" Ellison asked, glancing toward me with sudden alarm. "What about you?" "I'm staying with the primary systems," I said calmly. "Someone needs to manually redirect the ship's remaining power core away from the discharge, or the resulting explosion will take out several Allied vessels caught in the blast radius." "Absolutely not," Draven said sharply. "There has to be another option." "There isn't time to find one," I answered, already moving toward the ship's core systems access panel. "The moment the cabin ejects, you'll have less than a minute before this section reaches critical failure. Get clear, and trust that I know exactly what I'm doing." Ellison's expression carried a mixture of fear and reluctant understanding, the same look I imagined soldiers under my old command must have carried during Kestrel, watching me make the same kind of impossible calculation once more. "This is exactly what happened before, isn't it?" she said quietly. "This is Kestrel again." "Maybe," I admitted, working quickly at the access panel, "but this time, I intend to walk away from it." I gave the signal moments later, and the cabin section ejected cleanly, carrying Ellison and Draven safely clear of the rapidly destabilizing vessel. Alone within the remaining structure, I worked quickly and methodically, redirecting the ship's power core manually, forcing its catastrophic failure into a controlled, directional discharge, rather than an uncontained explosion that would have devastated everything nearby. The resulting release of energy tore through space violently, but contained, directed safely away from both the fleeing cabin section and the wider battlefield beyond. As the light faded and the wreckage of the vessel drifted silently into the darkness, the enemy formation, already crippled by the loss of their central technology source, began a full and disorganized retreat, their coordinated assault collapsing entirely without the unified power that had driven it forward. Aboard the recovered cabin section, Ellison stared out toward the drifting wreckage where our vessel had once been, her expression carrying a mixture of grief and disbelief. "He can't have survived that," she said quietly to Draven. Draven said nothing, staring silently toward the wreckage as well, though something in his posture suggested he was no longer entirely certain what to believe about the quiet human who had spent his final moments ensuring both of them escaped safely. The recovery teams found me nearly 6 hours later, drifting within a sealed emergency capsule I had managed to launch in the final seconds before the ship's core released its controlled discharge. I remember very little of those hours, only cold silence, the slow rhythm of recycled air, and the quiet certainty that I might not be found before that air ran out entirely. When the retrieval beam finally locked onto my capsule and pulled it gently into the flagship's hangar, I remember opening my eyes to Ellison's face, streaked with relief and disbelief in equal measure. "You absolute fool," she said, her voice breaking slightly as medical staff moved around us. "You told us to trust that you knew what you were doing." "I did know," I answered weakly. "I just didn't mention how close it would come to not working." She laughed then, a short, exhausted sound carrying more relief than humor, and pressed her hand briefly against my shoulder before stepping back to allow the medical team room to work. The battle, I learned over the following days, had ended decisively in the Alliance's favor. With their central disruption technology destroyed, the remaining enemy vessels had retreated in disarray, unable to maintain the coordinated assault that had once made them appear unstoppable. Allied forces pursued cautiously, recovering wreckage and intelligence that would help the Kalinth Imperium understand and prepare against any future encounters with this enemy, should they ever return. Princess Yathera visited me personally once I had recovered enough to receive guests, finding me seated quietly near the same observation deck where we had first spoken privately after my arrival. She said nothing at first, simply standing beside me, watching the stars stretch endlessly beyond the reinforced glass. "You could have evacuated with the others," she said finally. "Draven told me there was a narrow window where you might have escaped the ship entirely, rather than manually redirecting the power core." "There was," I admitted. "But that window would have meant leaving the discharge uncontained, and that would have meant losing several Allied vessels caught within its range. You weighed the lives of strangers against your own survival, and chose the strangers without hesitation," she said quietly. "I've made that calculation before," I answered. "It doesn't get easier with practice. It just becomes something you're capable of doing when the moment demands it." She turned to study me carefully, her violet eyes carrying an understanding that had not existed during our earlier conversations. "I requested Earth send me their greatest warrior, believing strength alone would be enough to save my people. What I received instead was someone who understood that true strength has very little to do with glory, and everything to do with what a person is willing to sacrifice quietly, without ever expecting recognition for it." "I never wanted recognition," I said. "I only wanted to help, and to walk away afterward with as much of myself intact as possible." "And did you?" she asked gently. "Walk away with yourself intact?" I considered her question carefully before answering honestly, more than I expected to this time, perhaps because I wasn't carrying this weight entirely alone. She nodded slowly, understanding passing silently between us once more. "The Kalinth Imperium owes Earth, and you personally, a debt that will not be easily repaid. Whatever assistance your world requires in the future, you have secured an ally that will not soon forget what was sacrificed on our behalf." "I didn't do it to secure an alliance," I said. "I did it because it needed doing, and because the people standing beside me deserved better than losing everything to an enemy that offered no explanation and no mercy." Yathera studied me for a long moment before speaking again, her voice softer than I had heard it before. "Your people call you a hero, Elias, even though you refuse to speak of what earned you that title. I understand now why they refuse to speak of it as well. It isn't secrecy protecting a reputation. It's respect protecting something far more fragile than reputation ever could be." I said nothing, allowing her words to settle quietly between us, as the stars continued their silent watch beyond the viewport. Ellison and Draven joined us shortly after, along with several officers who had fought alongside us throughout the engagement. There was no grand celebration, no elaborate ceremony of the kind Yathera had once described as customary among her people. Instead, there was simply quiet gratitude, shared glances between people who had survived something together, and the kind of unspoken understanding that comes only from facing genuine danger side by side. "What happens now?" Ellison asked eventually, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over our small gathering. "Now, we rebuild," Yathera answered, "and we remain vigilant, in case this enemy returns with greater numbers, or greater understanding of what defeated them this time." "And Earth?" Draven asked, glancing toward me. "What becomes of Earth's relationship with this alliance moving forward?" That depends on what Earth chooses to become, I answered honestly. I came here because I was asked to, and because I understood the stakes involved. Whatever alliance forms from what happened here should be built on that same understanding, not simply on gratitude for a single engagement. Euthera nodded in agreement. Then let us begin building precisely that kind of understanding, carefully and honestly, rather than rushing toward assumptions neither of our people are prepared to fulfill. In the days that followed, as the fleet slowly began its journey homeward, I found myself walking the same corridors I had first traveled upon arrival, though the weight I carried through them now felt different than before. I was no longer simply the quiet man nobody understood, the reputation whispered about in hushed, uncertain tones. I had become something else entirely, though I remained uncertain exactly what that something was, or whether it fit comfortably within the same silence I had once used to protect myself. Ellison found me one final time near the observation deck before our scheduled departure back toward Earth, standing quietly beside me as the stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport. "You never did tell me what actually happened at Kestrel," she said quietly. "Not the details, just enough to understand why you carry it the way you do." I considered her question for a long moment, understanding that after everything we had endured together, she had earned an answer more honest than the careful evasions I had offered everyone else over the years. "Kestrel taught me that ending something and surviving it undamaged are never the same thing," I said finally. "It taught me that sometimes protecting people requires becoming something you never wanted to be, and living afterward with exactly what that choice cost you. I carry it quietly, not because I'm ashamed of what I did, but because turning it into a story would mean pretending the cost wasn't real." Ellison studied me carefully, understanding settling behind her expression. "And this time? What did today cost you?" "Less than Kestrel did," I admitted quietly. Perhaps because this time, I wasn't standing alone when the moment finally arrived. She offered a small, genuine smile, the first I had seen from her since our initial meeting aboard the flagship. "Then maybe that's exactly what changes, moving forward. Maybe you don't have to carry the next one alone either." I said nothing further, though her words settled quietly within me, carrying a small, cautious hope I had not allowed myself to feel in a very long time. As our shuttle finally departed the flagship, beginning the long journey back toward Earth, I watched the alien vessel shrink slowly into the distance behind us, carrying with it an alliance forged not through boastful declarations of heroism, but through quiet sacrifice, careful understanding, and the simple willingness to do whatever the moment demanded, regardless of personal cost. Earth had sent Princess Euthera a war hero, though not the kind she had originally expected. They had sent her the quiet man who never spoke of war, understanding perhaps, better than anyone else, exactly why silence sometimes carries more weight than any story ever could. And as our shuttle broke free of the alien fleet's perimeter, angling steadily back toward the small blue world waiting patiently at the edge of the galaxy, I understood finally that whatever waited for me back on Earth, I would carry this experience the same way I had carried Kestrel, quietly, carefully, and without ever needing anyone to understand exactly what it had cost me to bring everyone home safely. Some stories are never meant to be told in full. Some are simply meant to be lived, carried quietly by those strong enough to bear their weight, so that everyone else never has to understand exactly how heavy that weight truly is.